The evening sky hung low over the sprawling ranch, the last streaks of orange and crimson fading into a dark, almost violet dusk. The wind whispered across the open plains, carrying dust and the faint scent of hay, mingling with the earthy aroma of the horses in the stables. The ranch had been silent for hours, save for the occasional creak of the barn doors and the rhythmic clatter of hooves pacing in the paddocks. Life out here was hard and the routine was rigid. Dawn to dusk, labor and toil, every day carved into the land like a promise. But for all its harshness, the ranch was a place of order, a place where danger was measured, and the unexpected was kept at bay. Until tonight. The giant rancher, a man whose presence alone commanded attention, moved through the barn with a careful, practiced pace. His broad shoulders brushed against the beams, and his heavy boots thudded against the wooden floor. Known in every town and settlement for his size, his strength, and his unyielding sense of justice, he had spent years building a life that required discipline above all. Nothing out of the ordinary ever reached him here. Nothing, that is, until the desperate knocking came. It started softly, almost timidly, but soon grew insistent. The rancher paused mid-step, hand hovering over the door handle. The sound was strange, urgent. Not a simple knock. It was a plea, a cry for help that seemed to vibrate through the very air of the ranch. Then he saw her. A tiny figure appeared at the edge of the doorway, soaked from the drizzle that had begun to fall, her small frame shivering violently under the oversized, tattered coat she wore. Dust clung to her hair, streaked across her tear-streaked cheeks, mixing with the water to create trails of mud and sorrow. She leaned heavily on the doorframe, her small fingers gripping it like a lifeline. Her voice came out in desperate gasps, broken by sobs. They beaten my mama. She is dying. The words cut through the evening air like a knife. The rancher, usually unshakable, froze. His eyes widened, the intensity of her fear and urgency making every muscle in his body tighten. He had seen hardship, cruelty, and violence before, but there was something about this child, something about the raw courage and vulnerability in her voice, that stirred something deep within him, something that demanded action. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, opening the door fully. The wind and rain tugged at the edges of his coat as he bent slightly to meet her gaze. "Tell me everything," he commanded. His voice low but firm, every word carrying the weight of authority and care. The girl trembled, her tiny shoulders shaking as she tried to steady herself. She described the horrors she had witnessed, men breaking into their home, smashing furniture, throwing belongings into the dirt. How they had threatened her mother, struck her, left her bleeding and barely conscious on the floor. Each word she spoke was punctuated by sobs, each pause heavy with fear and disbelief. As she spoke, the rancher's mind began racing. He had known lawlessness, he had fought for justice before, but this was personal. He could not allow such cruelty to go unpunished. And yet, he could see the terror in the child's eyes, the fear that the next moment could be the last. He knew he had to act, and act quickly. He crouched slightly to her level, resting a hand on her shoulder, steadying her with a gentle firmness that contradicted his massive frame. "You're safe now," he said. "I promise no one will hurt you or your mama again. We'll fix this." Her sobs subsided slightly, replaced by the trembling of disbelief and relief. She clutched his arm as if it were a lifeline to another world, one where justice existed and monsters could be stopped. The rancher adjusted his hat, the brim shading his weathered eyes, and nodded to himself. There was no time to waste. The night was already deepening, and the storm creeping across the plains threatened to make their journey harder. He fetched a lantern and motioned for her to lead the way. The journey to her home was tense, each step measured. The girl's small feet barely made a sound against the wet earth, yet her grip on his hand and her panicked whispers created a rhythm of urgency. Every mile they covered was heavy with anticipation, the rancher constantly scanning the dark horizon for signs of danger. Along the way, she recounted more details, the way the men had laughed while striking her mother, the fear that had frozen her in place, the cruel taunts that had followed them even as she tried to hide. The rancher listened, each detail adding fuel to a growing fire of resolve within him. He did not flinch, did not waver. Every word was a guide, every pause a reminder of the stakes. As they neared the small, isolated cabin, the rancher's senses sharpened. Broken branches, footprints in the mud, and the faintest smell of smoke told him the destruction was recent. He motioned for silence, letting the girl slip slightly ahead. She hesitated, then obeyed, leading him down the narrow path to the ruins of her home. The scene that met them was worse than either of them could have imagined. The cabin doors hung crookedly on their hinges, windows shattered, and inside, the remnants of what had been a home were scattered across the floor, broken chairs, splintered tables, and a trail of blood leading to the mother, who lay weakly on the floor. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow, her skin clammy with fever and fear. The rancher acted quickly, scooping her up with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. Every movement was deliberate, ensuring she was safe while giving the girl something tangible to hold on to, proof that they could survive this night. As he carried her back to the safety of his ranch, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. This night had changed everything. By the time they reached the main house, the girl was clinging to the rancher's coat, exhausted but alive. The mother was carefully placed on a prepared bed, the lantern casting shadows on her pale face. The rancher's mind raced with plans, tending to the mother, tracking down the men responsible, and ensuring that justice, swift, relentless, and unforgiving, would be served. The night stretched on, filled with the quiet murmurs of a child holding on to hope and the deep, unwavering determination of a man who had seen enough suffering to recognize it immediately. Outside, the storm continued, but within the walls of the ranch, a different kind of storm was brewing, a storm of courage, justice, and the promise that no evil would go unanswered. The girl finally sat beside her mother, holding her hand tightly, her face a mixture of fear and tentative relief. And the rancher, looming nearby, made a silent vow. Whatever it took, whoever it took, he would make them pay. The storm outside had intensified. Rain lashed against the roof, splintering the silence that had begun to settle over the ranch. The wind tore through the plains, rattling the windows and bending the trees as if the world itself was screaming in protest. Inside, however, a fragile calm had taken hold. The girl and her mother rested in the warmth of the main house, the lantern's glow painting long shadows across the wooden walls. Yet even in this temporary sanctuary, the tension was palpable. The weight of what had happened pressed heavily on every soul present. The rancher paced the floor, his boots leaving dark marks on the worn wood. His mind was a whirlpool of strategy, vengeance, and responsibility. He had seen brutality before, but rarely with such intimate horror. The men who had attacked the girl's home were no ordinary criminals. They were cruel, calculating, and perhaps emboldened by lawlessness that was spreading like wildfire across the plains. And now they had drawn his attention. The girl, now quieter, watched him from the doorway. Her eyes were wide, filled with both awe and a lingering fear. She clutched a small rag doll, its threadbare body a testament to years of neglect and survival. The rancher noticed her gaze and softened his tone. "We'll make sure they don't get away with this," he said. "But you need to be strong, little one. Things will be dangerous, and we can't afford mistakes." She nodded, barely understanding the magnitude of what he said, but trusting him completely. In her world, he was no longer just a man. He was a shield, a force capable of protecting what she held dear. The mother stirred, groaning softly as she struggled to lift her head. Blood still stained her dress, a reminder of the cruelty that had visited their home. The rancher knelt beside her, inspecting her injuries with careful hands, checking for broken bones, deep cuts, and signs of infection. His experience with hardship had taught him how to stabilize the wounded, even without the comforts of a doctor or hospital. "You're safe now," he reassured her. "We'll take care of you. No one will hurt you again." Her eyes, wide with fear and gratitude, flickered toward her daughter. "Please, don't let them—" "Take her too," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "They won't," the rancher replied, voice firm, unwavering. "I swear it." As the night deepened, he moved outside, lantern in hand, scanning the perimeter of the ranch. The footprints leading away from the girl's home were muddied by rain, but careful inspection revealed subtle details, the size of the boots, the direction they had taken, and the faint drag marks that suggested one of the men had carried something heavy. Every observation was a thread, every clue a pathway to justice. He knew he would not confront them blindly. The storm was both an obstacle and an ally. The darkness could conceal him, but it could also conceal them. Patience would be key. Every movement had to be calculated, every decision weighed. The rancher's mind, vast and disciplined, began piecing together a plan. He would gather intelligence, observe the men, and strike when the opportunity was unavoidable and absolute. Inside, the girl could no longer contain herself. Fear mingled with frustration, and she finally spoke, breaking the silence. Why? Why would anyone do that? Her small voice trembled, but her question was sharp, full of confusion and a budding sense of anger. The rancher looked at her, his expression hardening. Some people are cruel. They take because they can. They hurt because they enjoy it. But that doesn't mean we let them get away with it. Her tiny fists clenched around the doll. I want to help, she whispered, voice breaking but resolute. He knelt beside her, resting a massive hand on her shoulder. You're already helping, by staying safe and letting me fight for you. But you'll need to be careful. There's a lot of danger out there, more than you can imagine. Night stretched on. The mother's condition stabilized with makeshift care, but the rancher remained vigilant, refusing sleep. Every creak of the wind, every distant howl of a coyote, every shadow moving through the rain became a possible threat. Yet, beneath the tension, a plan began to crystallize, an idea that would require courage, strategy, and perhaps a touch of recklessness. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a glistening world of wet grass and mud-slicked trails. The girl and her mother rested quietly, unaware of the meticulous preparations the rancher had undertaken while they slept. Supplies were gathered, horses readied, and every tool at his disposal inspected. Maps were studied, and he memorized every route, every possible escape path, every hiding place that could serve as a trap. The world beyond the ranch was vast and unforgiving. The plains stretched endlessly, dotted with outposts, small towns, and occasional shanties. Yet, for all its expanse, the rancher felt confident. He knew the land intimately, the hills, the rivers, the hidden pockets where a man could disappear or strike. Tonight, he would use that knowledge. He mounted his horse, the saddle creaking under his weight, and felt the power of the animal beneath him. The girl watched from the doorway, clinging to her mother, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. The rancher's silhouette was enormous against the rising sun, a shadow stretching across the land, a promise of reckoning for those who had done wrong. As he rode toward the first trail leading to the criminal's hideout, the wind carrying the faint smell of wet earth and smoke, he felt the weight of responsibility. The storm had passed, but a new storm was coming, one he would bring to those who thought themselves untouchable. Back at the ranch, the girl's heart raced. Every moment without him was heavy with anticipation. She clutched her doll tightly, imagining the rancher moving swiftly across the plains, confronting the men who had shattered her life. Each passing hour brought a mixture of fear and hope, the tension unbearable yet strangely empowering. She felt the stirring of something new within her, a seed of courage, the first whisper of vengeance that mirrored the determination she saw in the rancher. By midday, the trail grew clearer. Broken branches and footprints revealed signs of movement, signs of carelessness from men who believed no one would dare pursue them. The rancher's eyes narrowed. Patience, precision, and force would be required. He would strike where they least expected, and justice would be absolute. Even as he approached the edge of their hideout, the shadow of the girl and her mother lingered in his mind. He could not fail, not when so much depended on him. The world had shown him cruelty before, but tonight, he would show it something far stronger. The relentless, unstoppable force of a man determined to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. And so, as the sun climbed higher, casting long golden beams across the plains, the first steps of reckoning began. The sun beat down mercilessly on the plains, turning the muddy trails into a shimmering haze. The air was thick with heat, dust, and the distant cries of birds startled by the storm's aftermath. The rancher rode steadily, his eyes scanning the horizon, every muscle taut with awareness. He had followed the trail for hours, the broken branches, disturbed soil, and muddied footprints narrating the path the criminals had taken. Every detail mattered. Every misstep could be exploited. The hideout appeared finally as a cluster of ramshackle cabins barely holding together, smoke curling from a half-collapsed chimney. It was a place where lawlessness thrived, where men believed themselves untouchable. But the rancher knew better. He had spent a lifetime navigating the wild, understanding not just the terrain but the men who dared to dominate it. He dismounted quietly, letting the horse graze while he crept closer on foot. The wind carried voices, low, rough, and cruel. The men were laughing, celebrating their ill-gotten deeds, unaware of the storm approaching in the form of one determined protector. He crouched behind a fallen log, assessing the situation. There were 5 men, each armed, each dangerous but sloppy. Their confidence was their weakness. They had underestimated the consequences of their cruelty. And now, the rancher's strategy began to unfold. He would strike precisely, using every advantage the land and his experience afforded him. Inside one of the cabins, the girl's mother stirred, her eyes fluttering open as the memory of the attack returned in sharp pangs. She felt an uneasy calm knowing the rancher was out there, confronting the men who had shattered her life. For the first time since that terrible day, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. The girl, sitting silently beside her, hugged the doll tightly, imagining the rancher as a giant shadow moving across the plains, unseen but unstoppable. Back outside, the rancher moved with silent precision. He used the terrain, small rises, trees, and debris, to his advantage, slowly circling the cabin cluster. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. The men, oblivious to the danger, continued their revelry. One of them tossed a knife casually into the air, catching it with a grin that made the rancher's jaw tighten. This cruelty, this arrogance, would be their undoing. The first strike was subtle. A distant shot rang out, the echo bouncing across the plains. One man yelped as a bullet tore through the doorframe, narrowly missing his shoulder. Panic replaced laughter. The rancher had announced his presence, not as a warning, but as a calculated prelude to what was coming. The men scrambled, trying to gather weapons to find cover, but the rancher was everywhere and nowhere, moving with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. His years on the plains, his understanding of survival, and his relentless focus gave him an edge they could not anticipate. One by one, he incapacitated them with surgical efficiency. Each encounter was swift, merciless, and necessary. The sound of struggle, gunfire, and shouts filled the air, but the rancher remained a figure of calm fury amidst the chaos. Inside the main cabin, the leader of the group realized the tide had turned. He tried to rally his men, but it was too late. Panic and confusion had replaced their earlier confidence. The rancher's strategy had worked. He had isolated them, exploited their overconfidence, and seized control of the battlefield without ever fully exposing himself. By late afternoon, the dust had settled. 4 men lay bound, bruised and terrified, while the leader stared at the rancher with a mixture of fear and disbelief. He had underestimated the man's skill, courage, and determination. The rancher, standing tall and unyielding, let the weight of his presence speak volumes. "This ends now," he said, voice low, calm, but edged with deadly resolve. "You hurt a mother, a child. You thought no one would stop you. You were wrong." The leader attempted defiance, but it was hollow. His men looked at him, then at the rancher, and fear replaced loyalty. The consequences of their cruelty were now tangible, unavoidable, and immediate. The rancher did not relish the violence. He had no desire for unnecessary bloodshed, but he understood the necessity of making an example. Justice in these lands was often a harsh and personal affair. It was the only language some men would ever understand. Meanwhile, miles away, the girl waited, her small hands clasped together, heart racing. She imagined the rancher confronting the men, the scene unfolding with every detail her mind could conjure. She felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time, she sensed the power of protection and vengeance intertwined. an understanding that, in this unforgiving world, courage could change the course of events. As dusk approached, the rancher secured the men and began the trek back to the ranch. The sky burned with hues of orange and purple, reflecting off the plains and casting long shadows that seemed to march alongside him. Each step, each movement was calculated to maintain control and prevent escape. The criminals, humbled and terrified, followed silently, the weight of their actions pressing down like the heat of the sun. Upon returning to the ranch, the mother and daughter watched from the porch. Relief and awe washed over them as the rancher led the men inside, bound and defeated. The girl's eyes glistened with tears, and the mother's hand trembled as she reached for her daughter. "You see?" the rancher said gently. "They can be stopped. They can be made to answer for what they've done." The girl hugged her mother tightly, feeling the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Fear, relief, gratitude, and a nascent sense of empowerment. The rancher's silhouette stood against the fading light, a giant figure not just of strength, but of unwavering justice. Yet, even as the sun disappeared behind the distant hills, a lingering tension remained. The plains were vast, and while one threat had been neutralized, the world was far from safe. There were others who thrived on cruelty, others who would test boundaries, and others who believed themselves above consequence. But the girl and her mother, for the first time, felt a sense of security. The rancher had shown them that even in a world of harshness and injustice, courage, strategy, and unwavering determination could protect the innocent. He had become more than a guardian. He was a symbol of hope, a promise that evil would not go unchecked. That night, as they settled into the warmth of the ranch house, the girl's thoughts were alive with questions and possibilities. She wondered about the men, about the choices that led them to cruelty, and about the strange power of justice that had been wielded so decisively. Her mother, exhausted but safe, held her close, murmuring quiet thanks for the protection they had received. The rancher stood at the edge of the porch, looking out over the plains. He knew this was only a momentary reprieve. The world was unforgiving, and the safety of the innocent was never guaranteed. But for now, he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. Justice had been delivered, and the promise of protection had been fulfilled. The girl's small voice broke the quiet. "Will they ever come back?" "They might," he replied, eyes scanning the horizon. "But we'll be ready, and if they do, they will learn the same lesson again." The plains fell silent, save for the wind whispering through the grass. Night had claimed the land, but within the walls of the ranch, a fragile peace settled, a peace forged in courage, strategy, and the unyielding spirit of one man willing to confront evil, no matter the cost. The night was heavy, the stars scattered across the sky like shards of glass, cold and distant. The ranch lay quiet, but inside the girl could not sleep. Her mind replayed the events of the day, the terror, the fear, the overwhelming presence of the rancher who had turned the tide of fate for her and her mother. She clutched her doll tightly, feeling the lingering tremors of fear slowly morph into something stronger. Resolve. Her mother, still pale but recovering, had insisted she stay in bed. Yet the girl's eyes refused to close. She remembered every detail, the twisted sneers of the men, the way they underestimated the strength of courage, and the calculated precision of the rancher who had brought them to justice. For the first time, she understood what it meant to stand against cruelty, not with violence for its own sake, but with the unwavering determination to protect those who could not protect themselves. Meanwhile, the rancher moved quietly through the ranch, inspecting the perimeter. Even though the captured men were confined safely, his instincts were never at rest. The plains were wide, the world unpredictable, and he knew that darkness often traveled in packs. He had faced death countless times and had learned that vigilance was the only shield. His eyes scanned the horizon, ever watchful, a silent guardian in the shadow of night. By dawn, the first rays of light revealed a transformed landscape. The morning mist clung to the grass, the air fresh with the scent of dew and earth. The girl woke to find her mother already tending to the small garden outside, trying to reclaim normalcy in a world that had seemed broken beyond repair. The rancher approached, his presence a solid reassurance. "Today," he said, voice calm but firm, "we begin to rebuild. Evil may strike, but the innocent will always have defenders. Remember that." The girl nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. She felt a spark deep inside, a seed of courage and hope that had been planted in the heat of danger. For the first time, she imagined a life not just of survival, but of purpose, a life where she could one day stand against cruelty herself. In her own way, the captured men remained confined, their faces etched with fear and disbelief. They had survived the wrath of one man who refused to allow injustice to continue unchecked. And now, as they faced the consequences of their choices, they realized that terror could be wielded not just by the cruel, but by those who stood unwaveringly for justice. Days passed. The ranch returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the girl, forever changed by the events, remained vigilant. She learned from the rancher about survival, about courage, and about the complex balance between justice and mercy. She watched him move through the ranch with quiet authority, not seeking accolades, but ensuring that the vulnerable remained protected. The mother began to heal, both physically and emotionally, though the scars of the attack would never fully fade. Yet she found solace in the knowledge that they were no longer alone, that someone had come when they were most vulnerable and had acted decisively. The rancher had not just saved lives. He had restored a sense of justice in a world that had seemed irreparably cruel. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the distant hills, painting the sky with hues of crimson and gold, the girl approached the rancher. "Will I ever be brave like you?" she asked softly, eyes wide with sincerity. He looked down at her, seeing not just fear, but potential. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear," he said, voice gentle. "It's what you do when fear is all around you. You've already faced it today, and you'll face it again. But each time you grow stronger. Each time you choose courage." The girl hugged her mother, feeling the bond between them fortified by the trials they had endured. The rancher watched from a distance, a silent guardian whose actions had shaped their fate. And in that quiet moment, the weight of the world seemed a little lighter, the darkness a little less oppressive. As the days turned into weeks, the story of what had happened at the ranch began to spread quietly among the neighboring towns. People spoke of a giant rancher who had appeared out of nowhere to stop cruelty, to protect the innocent, and to ensure that justice was delivered when the law had failed. The girl listened to these whispers with a mix of awe and understanding. She realized that heroes often walked quietly among the shadows, unseen yet profoundly impactful. One late afternoon, the girl and her mother stood together at the edge of the property, watching the horizon where the sun met the plains. "Will they come back?" she asked again, a hint of worry in her voice. "Perhaps," the rancher replied, joining them silently. "But now you know something important. Courage, determination, and the will to act. These are stronger than fear. And together, we are stronger than those who would do harm." The girl nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate within her. She had witnessed the power of justice, the strength of protection, and the unyielding spirit of someone who refused to bow to cruelty. And in that moment she understood that life, though fragile and often cruel, could also be shaped by courage, love, and the unwavering choice to do what was right. As night fell over the plains, the ranch stood as a beacon of safety. Fires burned warmly in the hearths, the wind carried the soft sounds of peace, and the girl felt a sense of belonging she had never known. The past would always remain, a shadow of pain and memory, but it had been tempered by the light of hope and the enduring presence of someone who had stood firmly for justice. The rancher, ever vigilant, remained at the edge of the property, watching over them. He knew that evil never rested, that the plains held dangers yet unseen. But for now, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection, knowing that the most important battle had been won, not just against cruelty, but for the protection of innocence, for the restoration of hope, and for the affirmation that courage could indeed change the course of lives. And the girl, gazing up at the stars, whispered quietly to herself, a vow she would carry forever. She would never forget what she had witnessed, what she had survived, and the giant who had taught her that even the smallest among them could stand tall when faced with the darkness. The plains were vast, the night deep, but within the walls of the ranch, justice had been served, courage had been proven, and hope had been rekindled. And as the wind whispered through the tall grasses, it carried the promise of a future where bravery and compassion could coexist, shaping a world where innocence was protected and those who dared to harm others would always face the reckoning.